Hey everyone, welcome to Meghan Grace DIY. This tutorial is going to show you just how easy it is to make a circle skirt. A circle skirt is one of the most basic types of skirts that gives you this really flowy, beautiful shape. And once you've learned how to do it, you can create lots of different variations. I'm going to show you how to do a waistband and a zipper closure. But before we get started on the sewing, let's talk about the pattern. 90% of the skirts that you see in sewing start from two different places, either a rectangle or a circle. What type of shape you're going to use depends on what you want the final look of your project to be. If you're going to use a rectangle, you're going to have the same amount of fullness at the waist as you do at the hem, and that means you're going to have a lot more of a bell shape to your skirt. The rectangle shape is a great option if you want a lot of fullness coming right out at the waist, and I've done a tutorial on this in my gathered skirt video. But if you're looking for a sleek shape at the hips and the waist and fullness at the hemline, then you want to go more for a circle shape skirt. In case you aren't quite sure exactly what shape you're looking for or can't picture it, let me show you some quick examples. We have Rihanna's dress here. That's definitely a rectangle shape. You can tell by the amount of fullness that is gathered into the waistline. Then let's compare Rihanna's dress to Kate Middleton's wedding dress, where you can see there really isn't as much fullness at the waist. The fabric comes out from the waist and it flows very smoothly over the hip and continues going outward towards the hemline. And in some cases, designers will combine both a circle skirt with some gathering at the waistline, like we see here in the famous blue Cinderella dress. This type of combination is usually done to give you some really epic fullness at the hemline and a little bit of body and lift at the waistline, but not as much as if you had to gather all of that width into the waistline itself. Once you've settled upon a circle skirt as your desired shape, you might think you're a little bit limited on the amount of fullness that you can put in a skirt, but I'm going to show you that that's not true. The fullness of a circle skirt is determined by how many circles you have built into that skirt. Now, most circle skirts and the circle skirt we're going to do today starts at simply one circle. That gives you a really lovely amount of fullness like I'm showing you here. It gives you some great movement when you twirl the skirt, and it's a good starting point. If you're looking for a bit more fullness than one circle, you can try cutting two circles. You would cut through the circle on one side and sew the two circles together. That'll give you the amount of fullness that you're looking at right now. Say you're working on a princess type ball gown and two circles still isn't quite enough fullness. Go ahead and go for three. This is an example on screen as to what three circles would look like. And you guys can kind of get the idea here. You can continue on and add in circles for however much fullness you need. My last example is of four circles, and that is a pretty epic amount of fabric. You're looking at some pretty serious yardage when you get up to 3 or 4 circles, as you can see here. But if you're really going for that stunning, dramatic, full skirt look, especially like for a princess dress or a ball gown or a quinceañera, then yes, you are gonna want to add in those circles and really pump that drama up. And before I move on to the pattern drafting section of this video, I think it's important to note that you can also take fullness out of the skirt. You could do a quarter circle or a half circle, and that'll still give you a little bit of swish around the hemline, but keep the waistline nice and sleek. I'm going to use this piece of paper to demonstrate how to make our pattern. You're going to need two measurements, your waist measurement and the length of the skirt you'd like to make. For demonstration purposes, I'm going to use my dress form for the example, which has a waist of 27 inches and my skirt length will be 20 inches. To accommodate for the zipper, we're going to add 2 inches to our waist measurement. So for me, it comes out to be 29 inches. Now I'm going to help you out with the math here by showing you the Omni calculator, which allows you to enter your measurements and will give you the measurements that we're going to need to complete the pattern. So at the waist, you're going to enter whatever your waist measurement was, you're going to enter your side length, and that's going to give you the 2 numbers that we're going to need to continue on making the pattern. Also, feel free to poke around their website a little bit. Again, this is the Omni calculator, and they've got lots of great calculators that are very helpful for sewing. And of course, I'm going to put the link in the description below. Now I'm going to take the 2 numbers I just found out and write them down on my pattern piece. So my radius is 3.82 and the length of my fabric is going to be 24.6. Now how I have this drawn on the piece of paper is the part where it says Meghan Grace DIY, that's a perfect square, so 8.5 by 8.5. I'm going to cut off my measurements so that way I can keep them in front of me while I go to manipulate the rest of the paper. And just in case, I've included a printable version of what you see on my screen in the description section below. From here on out, we're basically pretending that our square of paper is a square of fabric. So as I'm folding this piece of paper, you have to then transfer these steps onto your actual fabric. Because drafting a circle pattern would just be way too big for the screen, it's a little easier for me to do it in a smaller scale, so that way you can follow those steps on your own. You're gonna take the skirt length measurement that you just found and multiply it by 2. You wanna make sure that's how wide and how long your square of fabric is. Then take your fabric and fold it in half widthwise and lengthwise. Once your fabric is folded, you want to measure from the point in the middle out to the side. It doesn't matter which way you go. And you want to mark wherever your skirt length measurement stops. So for mine, it was 24.6. I'm going to mark 24.6. Then we're going to take our radius number and measure from that central point in our fabric out in both directions, because our goal is to cut a curved circle that matches that radius number. So I'm measuring up, I'm measuring to the side, and I'm also measuring through both of those points. And once you've marked all those measurements, you're going to draw a circle basically to connect the dots. And the last measurements we have to mark is basically a quarter of a circle on our fabric, and we're making a cutting guide for how we're going to cut the skirt out. So I'm going to start at the 12 o'clock on our clock. I'm going to measure from the center of the skirt or the fabric upwards, and you can use either a ruler or a tape measure, and you're going to mark that fabric length number that you got from the computer generator. And you want to keep following the clockwise direction and make enough marks that you'll be able to cut a nice even circle out of your fabric. Now that all my measurements are marked, I can cut along the outside circle that I just created. And once that's done, you can cut along the inside circle that you created. Obviously, it's pretty easy for me to just pick the paper up in this case, but you're going to want to have your fabric either laid out on a table or on the floor. And once you unfold the pattern or your fabric itself, you should have a lovely even circle. If you're planning to do a zipper, you want to choose one of your fold lines to cut from the outside of the skirt straight into the center of the skirt. Now I'm going to go off and repeat this with my actual fabric, and then I'll meet you guys back here. Now that I'm back, let's go through all the supplies we're going to need for this project. So I needed enough fabric to cut out my circle and a waistband. So for my circle, I needed at least 1.5 yards. And then, when you're getting your fabric, you always want to get a little extra just in case. So if I got 1.75 yards for this, that'd be totally fine. But again, that number is going to change depending on what your measurements were when you did the Omni calculator. You can see I've got my extra fabric strips off to the side to create my waistband. I've got some woven fusible interfacing, which I'll put the type that I love in the description below. And I've also got a zipper. I'm going to need a 12-inch zipper for this project, but again, you might like a zipper that's a little shorter or a little longer. Now that I've cut out my fabric, I'm going to show you what it looks like on my dress form. Your skirt should be nice and even at the bottom. You shouldn't see any extra length on the sides or in the front or the back. And it should flow nice and easily over the hips. You can see I've got the slit up the back, and that's going to be where I place my zipper, so you should have a little bit extra around your waist at this point. Let's move on to the waistband. If you have enough fabric, I'm going to recommend that you cut your waistband on the bias, or basically fold your fabric at a 45-degree angle. This gives your waistband just a little bit of stretch, and I find that it fits flatter against the body. But if you don't have enough fabric to do this, that's completely fine. You can cut your waistband straight. I would like my finished waistband to be 1 inch wide. So that means I need to double that number and add 1 inch for seam allowance. So you need your finished piece of fabric to be 3 inches wide. Since what I've got on the screen is folded in half, I'm measuring 1.5 inches away from the fold, and I'm gonna cut that straight. Obviously, you're gonna need just enough inches of your waistband to go around your waist. So in this case, it would be 29 inches. But if you don't have quite enough fabric in one go, especially if you're doing a bias cut waistband, you can sew 2 pieces together. You just wanna try to put your seam in an inconspicuous place. You don't want a seam sitting right in the front of your skirt. Now, if you saw from the opening picture that I'm doing something a little extra special with my skirt, I'm gonna put some ties on my waistband that create a bow in the back. So I'm gonna cut extra strips so that way I can attach the ties to the edges of my waistband. Now I'm gonna cut some interfacing. Again, if you aren't quite sure what cutting something on the bias means, it's when you fold the fabric at a 45-degree angle, and it gives you a little bit more stretch than if you were to fold something just on the perpendicular or the straightaway. Now I only need an inch wide strip of interfacing here, so I'm gonna cut a 1/2 inch wide, so it'll unfold to be 1 inch, and cut all the way down that fold line. As you can see, cutting on the bias does kind of cut right through the middle of your fabric, so You know, if you don't have a lot of fabric, I'd probably recommend cutting on the straightaway for this project, but since I do have quite a bit of interfacing on hand, I can cut on the bias no problem. To make sure this video isn't 30 minutes long, I did a few steps off screen. I went ahead and ironed on my interfacing, and I attached the 3 pieces of my waistband that I want to make sure it's long enough to do the ties in the back. See how my seams are on a diagonal? That's how you want to attach anything that's bias cut. That'll give you the best fit around the waist. Also, if you happen to hear any weird noises during this video, I've got a new family member sitting at my feet. About 3 months ago, I adopted a French bulldog, and his name is Bailey. So he's 5 months now, and the adventure into dog ownership, dog parentship, has been very, very interesting. So if you want to follow our adventures there, please feel free to check us out on Bailey the Baked Potato Frenchie on Instagram. We're finally ready to start sewing. Thread up your machine whatever color will match your fabric the best, and we're going to start at the back seam where our zipper is going to go. We're going to do a zigzag stitch down the edge of the fabric. We're going to do this to finish off the fabric so it doesn't fray once we've made our skirt. If you have a serger, you're more than welcome to use the serger to finish off the fabric as well. We're also going to apply something called a stay stitch to the waist. Now, stay stitching is usually put in place on a curve in a garment, and it's just a straight stitch at a regular length, about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. And we put that in place to make sure the curve that we just cut doesn't stretch out and get all warped on us. So these are the little steps that you don't want to skip to make sure your garment comes out just absolutely pristine. Moving right along, we're going to sew closed the back seam of the skirt. So you want to measure from the top of that seam down to where your zipper ends and mark that with a pin. And then from that pin down to the bottom of the skirt, you're going to sew a regular straight seam with a length of 3, back stitching at the top and the bottom with a 1-inch seam allowance. Once you finish sewing that seam, you're going to take it over to the iron and press it open. Now the pieces of fabric that aren't sewn, you're also going to press those folded over 1 inch to prepare to put in our zipper. For this project, I'm going to walk you through how to do a lapped zipper. Now, for all of you at home who are saying, oh no, zippers, I'm scared of zippers. Don't be scared of zippers. Just follow along with me and you're going to put in a beautiful zipper. I'm going to start with my zipper unzipped, and I'm going to take the left-hand side of the zipper and line the teeth up directly with the fold of the fabric. You don't want the fabric overlapping the teeth at all here. You want to be able to clearly see the teeth and then see the fabric beside it. And we're going to put a few pins in place to hold the tape where we need it to stay. With this close-up, you can see a little bit more accurately where the fabric ends up. You're going to swap out your regular foot to a zipper foot, and you're going to stitch the fabric right against those zipper teeth. This is one of those parts of a project where it's very important to take your pins out as you sew, because if you sew over a pin here, you're going to get a big warble in your stitching, and having nice, clean, straight stitching is very, very important. When you're a few inches away from the bottom of the zipper, you're going to sink your needle and lift your presser foot and close the zipper, basically taking the zipper pull out of the way. You don't want to sew around your zipper pull because, again, you're going to get a big warble in your stitching, and we don't want that. When you reach the bottom of the zipper, do a small back stitch and take the zipper out from the machine. What you want to do is line the fabric up as if it was sewn closed. So now you should have a fabric lap over the teeth on the other side. Pin that in place, and we're going to return to the machine. Now, if you're a more experienced seamstress and you don't need to pull it out and pin it, by all means just go across the bottom and finish the zipper by going up the other side. When you go to stitch across the bottom of the zipper, you want to do this with your hand wheel, not with the pedal. So that way you can guide the needle over the teeth of the zipper. If you hit the teeth, you're probably going to break your needle. And then once you've sewn across the bottom, you can sink your needle and turn your fabric so that way you can do a straight stitch up the other side of the zipper. Again, remembering to take your pins out as you go, and you're using a stitch length of 3. When you start to reach the end of your stitch line, we're going to do what we did on the first side, which is sink our needle, raise the presser foot, and take the zipper pull and pull it past the presser foot. So that way, again, we're not stitching around the presser foot and getting any weird bubbles, or as I like to call them, warbles in our stitch line. Now that I'm done with the stitching, I want to take it out and show you a close-up of what the overlap should look like. You can see your stitching is all straight. You want the overlap to accurately cover the teeth, and you want to be able to move your zipper pull up and down the zipper in a smooth motion. Hopefully you were able to get through that zipper without ripping out too many seams. Once you've done your zipper, you're ready to move on to attaching the waistband. You want to mark or put a small clip in the center front of your waistband and the center front of your skirt. Use these marks to line the waistband up with the waistline. Interfacing is always placed on the fabric that's closest to the body. So if you see how I've got my waistband positioned here, my interfacing would fold inward and end up on the fabric that's closest to my body. Otherwise known as you want to be pinning together two pieces of fabric right now that do not have interfacing on them. Once you've got the center lined up, you can work your way outwards towards the zipper and pin your waistband along the waistline. Now that you're all pinned together, we're ready to go back over to the sewing machine. We're going to stitch the waistband to the waistline at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and you're going to start by sewing over the zipper tape. That will trap the zipper tape in the waistline and give you a really nice finished look. As you're stitching together the waistband and the skirt itself, one of the biggest pitfalls you might fall into is the fabric of the skirt kind of creeping up underneath, and then you get some bubbles in your waistline. So as I'm sewing, you can see that I'm just continually checking that the fabric underneath is still flat and smooth. As we come to the end of the waist seam, we're going to sew over the other side of the zipper tape as well, and we really want to try to make sure that we've sewn at an even seam allowance, so when you close the zipper, the seam of the waistline lines up perfectly. Since I've already pressed my waistband folded through the middle, you can see how this is shaping up to be a really pretty waistband at the top of my skirt. And at this point, if you don't want to do the ties, you would just square off the end of the waistband and attach a pants hook. But I am going to put these pretty ties on the back to make a bow, so follow along and I'll show you how we're going to complete these ties. I'm going to fold back the waistband so I'm seeing the inside of the fabric on the outside, and you're going to line up the two edges. Then you want to find right where your waist seam ended from the step we just did. From that point on, you're going to stitch down the entire length of the tie. So basically you don't want a gap in where the waist seam ended and the start of your tie seam begins. Once you get to the end of the tie, I like to hang a 45-degree angle and sew a line across the bottom so that way the end of the tie is closed with a really pretty point at the end. These little finishing techniques I think are what really make your garments look not home sewn and professionally done. When you've completed one side of the tie, take the steps we just did and repeat them on the other side. When you've got both sides of the ties done, you're going to flip them right side out, take them over to the iron, and give them a nice clean press. Properly pressing your garments is probably the #1 way that you can improve how your garments look. A lot of people maybe have been home sewing for a while and they take a look at their garments and they're like, why don't they really look as nice as I'd like them to? Usually it's pressing. So if you make sure you press every step and press everything nice and clean and flat, I promise you're going to see a vast improvement in your home garments. Speaking of pressing, we're now going to take the top of our waistband, the side that's not attached to the skirt, and we're going to press it down a 1/2 inch to prepare to do a slip stitch and finish off the inside of the waistband. So you can see here, I'm going to do something called a slip stitch. And if you've never done a slip stitch before, I have a separate video on how to do a slip stitch, but it's also known as the tunnel and bite technique. And I'm going to start where the waistband lifts up from the tie, and you go through the tunnel, which is the waistband, and then you take a bite out of the skirt. And while you do this, you're going to want to press the seam allowance from the waist seam up inside of basically this casing that you've just made with the waistband. So that way you're hiding any of the rough edge that you might have there. Once you've finished your slip stitch, you can flip your skirt right side out and give one more hit with the iron. You can press your skirt and that waist seam down, make sure you don't get any little folds in there, and press those ties nice and flat. And next step, we're going to be ready to do our hem. Hems on large circle skirts tend to also be the bane of many people's existences, so there's a couple different ways that we can attack this. I'm going to show you how to do something called a tiny rolled hem, and a tiny rolled hem is where you take one edge of the skirt and you're going to fold it up just 1/4 inch. We're going to go all the way around the circumference, stitching that edge down. Now, should you press it before you sew it? You can. This is one of those steps that I think it's okay to press afterwards. So you're going to roll that up 1/4 inch, you're going to stitch all the way around, and then we're going to head over to the iron and we're going to press it nice and flat. After your press, you're going to come back over to the machine and you're going to turn the hem up another 1/4 inch. And you're going to stitch right along the fold that you just created. So on the inside of the skirt, you're going to end up seeing 2 stitch lines, but on the outside of the skirt, you should only see 1. And then once you've done that last fold and stitch, you're going to press it one more time and you should have a really, really pretty rolled hem at the bottom of your skirt. And guess what? Now that you're done with your hem, you are done with your first circle skirt, and I couldn't be more proud of you. As I fumble with my mannequin here and I show you how I'm gonna tie my ties in the back of my skirt, make this pretty little bow, I just wanna impart to you that learning how to make a circle skirt is a foundation of your sewing skills. A circle skirt can be for a Halloween costume. You can make fun skirts for the summer. You can attach a circle skirt to a bodice to make a dress. You can make poodle skirts for theme day. There's so many things that you can do from learning the basic skill of a circle skirt. So now that you know that skill, I want you to take what you've learned from this video and create your own projects and get as creative as you want. And that's going to conclude this tutorial. I hope you found it informative and easy to follow and had some fun along the way too. If you find my content helpful, please feel free to hit the subscribe button as well as share this video with other sewers and other people learning to sew, so that way you can help my channel grow. Also, make sure you hit the like button, and if you have any comments or questions, please put them in the comment section below, because any interaction with this video helps raise it in YouTube's ranks and gets it in front of the eyes of more people. Lastly, I just want to remind you can find me on Instagram and Pinterest at Meghan Grace DIY, and I did have a Facebook page, but unfortunately my Facebook was hacked in March and I still have not been able to get it back. So Meghan Grace DIY Facebook page and Messenger has been down, so if you need to get in touch with me, please find me on Instagram or Pinterest. And as always, happy sewing!